My beloved child. Do not move past this moment too quickly, because something has been placed before your heart tonight that was never meant to feel ordinary. Pause here, just for a little while. There is a reason these words found you when they did, and there is something unfolding behind the silence that you have not been able to see. Someone connected deeply to your heart has been carrying words they could no longer keep trapped inside, and tonight those words finally found their way onto a page. Your soulmate has written you a secret love letter. Not the kind of letter filled with perfect phrases or rehearsed promises, but the kind written when the heart becomes too full to stay quiet. And what makes this moment even more mysterious is that the letter was never meant to remain forever. In this story, it has only 1 hour before it disappears, as though time itself has placed a fragile window around a confession that has been waiting far too long to be spoken. But before you understand why the letter cannot stay, you must understand what happened in the moments before it was written, because the truth begins somewhere you would never expect. There was a moment recently when your soulmate sat alone and suddenly realized that silence was beginning to cost them more than honesty ever could. They had spent so much time pretending they could manage what they felt for you. They convinced themselves they could remain calm. They told themselves they could wait another day, another week, another season. They tried to behave as though your presence in their heart was something they could neatly place into a corner and return to whenever life became convenient. But feelings that are real do not obey convenience, and love that has been buried does not disappear simply because someone refuses to name it. It grows quietly beneath everything. It appears in unexpected memories. It interrupts ordinary moments. It turns a familiar song into something unbearable. It transforms an empty room into a place filled with someone who is not physically there. And that is exactly what began happening to them. You were showing up everywhere without being there at all. They would reach for their phone and stop themselves. They would type words and erase them. They would imagine what they might say if they had only one chance to speak without fear, without pride, without worrying about what your response might be. And every time they silenced themselves, the pressure in their heart grew stronger. What they did not understand was that something within them was changing. The walls they had built were no longer protecting them. Those walls had become a prison. The distance they once believed would make everything easier had begun doing the opposite. It had started revealing just how deeply your absence affected them. And one night, after another long battle between what they felt and what they were afraid to admit, they finally stopped resisting. They opened a blank page. Their hands hesitated. Their mind filled with 100 reasons to close it again. But their heart whispered something louder than fear: if you never say it, they may never know. That was the moment the letter began. The first sentence was not dramatic. It was not perfect. It was almost painfully simple. They wrote that they did not know if you would ever see these words. Then they stopped. For several minutes, they stared at that one sentence because suddenly everything became real. Writing your name in their thoughts was one thing. Putting their feelings into words was another. The moment their emotions became visible on that page, they could no longer pretend they were confused. They knew exactly what they felt. That frightened them more than uncertainty ever had. Because uncertainty allows someone to hide. Truth does not. Truth stands in the room and asks to be acknowledged. And the truth your soulmate had been avoiding was this: their feelings for you had never become smaller. They had only become quieter. Then another sentence appeared. And another. The letter began moving faster, as though their heart had been waiting years for permission to speak. They wrote about the moments they remembered that they thought you had probably forgotten. Small things. The way you once said something without realizing how deeply it stayed with them. A moment you looked at them differently. A conversation that ended too soon. A time they almost told you how much you mattered but lost their courage at the final second. These were not grand memories the world would notice. But love often hides inside details no one else sees. Your soulmate had kept those details safely within them, returning to them during nights when they felt alone, during mornings when they wondered whether you still thought of them, during days when life looked completely normal from the outside while something inside them quietly called your name. And then the letter changed. It stopped being a collection of memories and became a confession. They wrote that they were sorry for every time their silence made you question your value. They admitted there were moments when they wanted to come closer but stepped backward instead. Not because you were unwanted, but because wanting you felt terrifyingly serious. They had known connections before. They had experienced attraction, attention, temporary excitement, the kind of feelings that burn brightly and then fade. But with you there was something different, something that followed them into silence. Something that did not disappear when the conversation ended. Something that remained after time passed. And they did not know how to handle a connection that seemed to ask more from them than charm or temporary courage. Your presence seemed to ask for truth, and truth was the one thing they had spent years learning how to avoid whenever their heart became vulnerable. You may have wondered why someone who cared could remain so quiet. You may have asked yourself why affection can sometimes look like distance. This letter carries the answer your heart has wanted to hear, but not in the way you expect. Your soulmate did not step away because they felt nothing. They stepped away because they felt something they could not control. Somewhere inside them was an old fear that love always eventually asks for something they will fail to give. Perhaps they feared disappointing you. Perhaps they feared becoming attached and losing you afterward. Perhaps they feared that if you truly saw every imperfect corner of who they were, you would choose to leave. So they tried to control the ending by never fully beginning. But the heart does not become safe merely because it remains unspoken. Sometimes silence hurts more than rejection because silence leaves the mind wandering through endless possibilities. And tonight, in this fictional divine moment, heaven seems to lean closer to that page because what they wrote next surprised even them. They wrote, "I think I have been waiting for you longer than I knew." When they saw those words, they froze. They had not planned that sentence. It appeared before they could overthink it. But suddenly memories began connecting in ways they had never allowed themselves to consider. They remembered the relationships that felt almost right but never complete. They remembered moments when they wondered why certain people could be kind, beautiful, wonderful, and still not reach the deepest part of them. They remembered the strange sense that something, or someone, was missing. Then they remembered you, and for the first time they allowed themselves to wonder whether their heart had recognized something before their mind was ready to understand it. But there is more. The letter contains something your soulmate has never admitted aloud to anyone. There was a night when they almost contacted you. Not casually. Not with a meaningless message. They nearly told you everything. They sat with your name on their screen and wrote a confession. They read it once. Then twice. Then again. Their finger hovered over the button that would have sent it directly toward you. For one breath, they were ready. But fear entered at the final second. They imagined you reading it and saying nothing. They imagined you had moved on. They imagined they had misunderstood everything. And instead of sending it, they erased every word. Yet the feeling remained. That unsent message became a quiet ghost in their mind, returning whenever they wondered what might have changed if they had been brave enough. Tonight, they have written those words again. Only this time, the letter goes deeper than the message they erased. They wrote about jealousy they were embarrassed to feel. Not dark jealousy, not possessiveness, but the small painful thought of someone else receiving the closeness they secretly wished they had with you. They admitted that sometimes they wondered who made you laugh when they were not there. Who you told your fears to. Who heard about your day. Who might someday become important enough that there would no longer be space for them to return. And every time that thought entered their mind, something inside them tightened. It forced them to confront the possibility that waiting forever was not harmless. Time keeps moving even when the heart hesitates. Then they wrote something even more vulnerable. They admitted that they sometimes searched for signs of you without letting anyone know. Perhaps checking whether you had appeared somewhere. Perhaps revisiting an old conversation. Perhaps remembering words you said months ago. Perhaps looking at a photograph longer than necessary. It was never about obsession. It was about reassurance. They wanted proof that the connection had existed outside their imagination. Because in the quietest hours, they doubted themselves. They wondered whether you had felt anything similar or whether they had simply assigned meaning to ordinary moments because they wanted you to matter. But then came the sentence that changed the emotional weight of the entire letter. I was afraid you would realize you deserved someone braver than me. Read that again within your heart. Their deepest fear was never simply that you would reject them. Their deepest fear was that you would understand your own worth so completely that their hesitation would become impossible to forgive. They knew there were moments when you needed clarity and they gave you confusion. Moments when you deserved warmth and received distance. Moments when they could have said, I care about you, but instead allowed pride or fear to speak through silence. Somewhere inside them, guilt has been growing around those memories. And the letter became their way of finally admitting that they noticed more than you realized. They noticed when your energy changed. They noticed when you stopped reaching in the same way. They noticed when something in you became tired of carrying unanswered questions. And although they may never have told you, that change shook them. Because for the first time, they understood that your heart was not something they could expect to remain waiting forever. That realization created the urgency behind this letter. The 1-hour disappearance is not meant to frighten you. It represents something deeper in this cinematic story, the fragile nature of opportunities. Some words come into our lives and remain forever. Others arrive like a door opening for only a moment, asking whether we will be present enough to notice what they are trying to teach us. This letter is not simply about whether your soulmate loves you. It is about whether love can survive when courage keeps arriving late. And your soulmate knows this. That is why the next part of the letter was written differently. Their tone became less hesitant. They stopped trying to protect themselves. They wrote as if the page were the only place where fear could no longer interrupt them. They wrote that if they could stand before you with nothing hidden, they would tell you they never wanted you to mistake their silence for indifference. They would tell you that some of the moments when they appeared strongest were the moments they were struggling most. They would tell you that they sometimes rehearsed conversations with you in their mind because reality felt too risky. They would tell you that they had imagined seeing you again and wondered what expression would appear on your. And your soulmate knows this. That is why the next part of the letter was written differently. Their tone became less hesitant. They stopped trying to protect themselves. They wrote as if the page were the only place where fear could no longer interrupt them. They wrote that if they could stand before you with nothing hidden, they would tell you they never wanted you to mistake their silence for indifference. They would tell you that some of the moments when they appeared strongest were the moments they were struggling most. They would tell you that they sometimes rehearsed conversations with you in their mind because reality felt too risky. They would tell you that they had imagined seeing you again and wondered what expression would appear on your face. Would you smile? Would you become guarded? Would you look at them as though too much time had passed? Then they confessed something unexpectedly tender. They wrote that when they imagine a peaceful future, your presence keeps appearing in it. Not in a dramatic fantasy filled with impossible perfection. They imagined ordinary things. A quiet morning. A familiar voice from another room. 2 cups instead of 1. A conversation after a long day. Sitting beside someone without needing to perform. Knowing that the person across from them has seen the complicated parts of their heart and still chooses to remain. That is what frightened them. Because they realized their deepest longing was not simply to be loved by you. It was to feel safe enough to love you honestly. And for someone who has built their identity around emotional control, that kind of honesty can feel like standing at the edge of something enormous. My child, this is where the unseen story becomes even more interesting, because while they were writing, something happened. They reached a sentence they could not finish. They wrote your name, then stopped. The room became quiet. Their thoughts slowed. Their heart began beating differently, not from fear alone, but from recognition. They realized there was still one truth they had not placed into the letter. One truth they had been carefully circling around. Everything before this point had been confession, regret, tenderness, memory. But this next truth was different. This one could change everything. They tried to write it. Then deleted it. They wrote it again using softer language. Then deleted that too. They stood up and walked away from the page. But they came back. Because some truths become heavier when we refuse to speak them. They placed their hands near the keyboard, or perhaps over the paper, and finally began with 4 simple words. There is something else. And that is the line after which the letter became dangerous to their old way of living. Not dangerous in a fearful sense, but dangerous to every excuse they had used to remain hidden. Because what followed was not about the past anymore. It was about what they were planning to do next. They wrote that they had reached a point where merely missing you was no longer enough. They were tired of living inside imagined conversations. They were tired of asking themselves whether you still cared. They were tired of pretending time would somehow solve what only honesty could resolve. Something within them had shifted. They no longer wanted another season to pass while both of you remained trapped inside unanswered questions. But they still had one final hesitation. You. Not because you had done anything wrong. Because they did not know what your heart had become during their silence. They wondered whether you still carried tenderness for them or whether you had finally released the connection. They wondered whether you had built peace without them. And if you had, they feared that returning might disturb something you worked hard to heal. That thought mattered to them more than you might expect. It revealed something they had not understood about love before. Real love cannot only ask, "What do I want?" It must also ask, "What will protect the other person's peace?" So the letter changed again. They stopped making promises. They stopped imagining outcomes. Instead, they gave you freedom. They wrote that if your heart had moved somewhere else, they would not try to force you backward. If you had found happiness, they would never want their confession to become a burden. But if there was even a small unfinished place inside you that still wondered what could have been, they wanted you to know that they wondered too. That sentence cost them more courage than every romantic line before it. Because love becomes vulnerable when it releases control. And then, just as they were nearing the end of the letter, they looked at the clock. The countdown had begun. 1 hour. Why would they create something so meaningful only to let it disappear? Because they were afraid of leaving their heart exposed permanently. They wanted the truth to exist, but they were not yet strong enough to let it remain forever. Think about the symbolism of that. A person standing between courage and retreat. A confession alive for 60 minutes. A heart saying, "Please see me," while fear whispers, "But do not look too long." And somewhere inside that contradiction is the entire story of your connection. Your soulmate wants to be known. But being known means risking what comes after. Yet there is one part of this letter that changes everything you have heard until now. The final paragraph. They have not completed it yet. Because the final paragraph is not merely another confession. It contains a decision. And heaven, in this fictional story, seems to be holding the atmosphere completely still while they make it. They begin writing about the next time they see you. They begin describing something they have secretly imagined doing. Not something dramatic for attention. Something sincere. Something that would finally remove every doubt. They write that there is a sentence they want to say while looking directly into your eyes, because some truths lose meaning when hidden behind screens. They admit they have rehearsed this sentence again and again. In the car. Before sleep. While walking alone. During moments when memories of you appeared without warning. They know exactly what they want to say. But there is another secret. They are not sure whether they will have the courage to say it. And that is why they placed it inside the disappearing letter first. As practice. As a test. As the first small crossing between fear and honesty. They type the beginning. If I ever get one more chance with you. Then they stop. Their breath catches. The room feels different. Because they know the next words will reveal what they have truly wanted all along. Not what they wanted last month. Not what they wanted when loneliness became strong. What they have wanted beneath every layer of hesitation. Their finger moves again. Another sentence appears. Then another. And suddenly they are crying. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way someone cries when they finally stop lying to themselves. They realize how much time has passed. How many chances were lost to pride. How many simple moments could have been different if they had spoken sooner. And they realize something that changes the entire meaning of the letter. They did not write it only because they miss you. They wrote it because something happened recently that made them believe they might actually lose you. Something they saw. Something they heard. Something that reached them unexpectedly. And whatever it was, it forced them to imagine a future where you truly moved on without them. That possibility broke through every defense they still had. This is the revelation they have not fully explained yet. They mention it only once in the letter. One strange line hidden between paragraphs. I found out something about you, and since then I haven't been able to sleep the same. What did they find out? Was it something you said? Something someone told them? A change they noticed? A sign that you were finally closing the door? The letter does not say yet. But everything written afterward feels different. More urgent. More honest. As though your soulmate suddenly understands that love cannot continue existing only as potential. And now only minutes remain before the letter disappears. They scroll back to the beginning and read every confession. Every apology. Every memory. Every sentence they almost deleted. Then they reach the unfinished final paragraph. The cursor blinks beside the words. If I ever get one more chance with you. They place their hands back over the keys. This time, they do not stop. They begin writing the sentence they have been terrified to admit. The sentence that explains why they pulled away. The sentence that reveals what they discovered about you. The sentence that makes their entire secret love letter suddenly mean something far bigger than a confession. And as the countdown moves closer to its final moments, they write one last line beneath everything else. A line they have never said to you before. A line that begins with your name. A line that could change the way you understand every silence between you. But just before the final words appear, a notification flashes across their screen. They freeze. Because the name attached to that notification is someone they never expected to hear from tonight. And the message contains only 6 words. 6 words that could determine whether your soulmate sends the letter. Or deletes it forever.